Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today I'd like to take you on one scholar's journey, which was guided by two principles. I'd like to share with you the three secrets of profit and how that influenced the four study areas that I studied on my scholarship. And then while we're on this numbers theme, I'd like to discuss at the end how the whole is actually greater than the sum of all those parts. As a fourth generation grazier in northern Queensland, and managing a family property that's been owned by a family for over a century, I realise and well aware that I stand on the shoulders of previous generations of hard workers and courageous risk takers. And that history is great to have in our business, but history doesn't pay bills. And so we're always looking for innovative ways to do things to improve our business. And so I think Nuffield came along at a great time for me. And I really appreciate and thank Nuffield and my sponsor, Meat and Livestock Australia, for backing me with a scholarship. While I was travelling overseas, I had the opportunity to visit with the regional managers of MLA in Northern America as well as in the Middle East, and I really appreciated their insights and their hospitality. I'd also like to thank my family, my parents who stepped in to help with the business while I was away, my wife, who I only realised after hearing the scholars' wives speak a couple of days ago to the new scholars just how big a load that they really took on to allow me to have the opportunity. And to my children, who've grown so much in my absence, not just in height, but in ability, and we're very proud of you. As a family, we believe in we believe in balance, and two guiding principles that have guided our business, so to be both economically profitable and ecologically sustainable. And I think too much focus on one or the other is not going to build a truly sustainable business. And fortunately, I think there are strategies that can do both. So let's talk about profit. Profit in the northern beef industry has been quite difficult to achieve. Meat and Livestock Australia released a report in 2013 that showed over the previous 12 years, the return on assets managed had averaged about 1% annually. And then, so going back a few years, when I was a graduate in agricultural science, I took my first job consulting with Resource Consulting Services in Yeppoon, and I learned about the three secrets of improving profit. This is probably going to seem like economics 101, but when we start a business or have a business, the first cost we have are our overheads. They're always going to be there: rates, rents, repairs and maintenance. That's that horizontal line. The next line coming up at a diagonal are our direct costs. So as we run increasing numbers of cattle, our direct costs increase, such as supplements, animal health, and those types of things. And so that becomes our total cost. And so then our profit in that top triangle is only made once our gross product exceeds those total costs. And so if we keep that model in mind, what are the secrets that we can do to improve the profit? Well, the first thing we can do is to reduce our overheads, but we have to be very careful that we don't starve a profit into the business. We can also increase our gross margins, so we can increase the price received, the productivity of our enterprise, or we can reduce our direct costs. And finally, if we've got a business with with enterprises with good gross margins, then we can scale it up and increase our turnover or throughput through the business. And so since learning about these secrets, I've been very keen to look for ways to improve our family business as well as other opportunities for businesses in the north. And so after travelling for 16 weeks through New Zealand, Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, the United Kingdom, the United States and the United Arab Emirates, what did I learn and how do these things relate to the three secrets? The first area that I looked into was the selection of fertile adapted cattle. And this was driven by the desire to find animals that were well adapted to their environment and didn't need as many inputs, but still had good production. And in doing so would increase our gross margins. What I learned is that genetic selection is happening whether we plan for it or not. So we better make sure we select for what we do want. If we introduce a bull into our herd with undesirable traits, it will continue to have an impact on our herd and through his progeny for the next 15 years. And to me, this highlighted the importance to performance record our herds. We need to measure what's happening and record that, and then use that information to select the superior animals and to cull the inferior animals. And I was amazed by a visit to Jacaranzino in Brazil, where we visited and looked at this high-performing Nelore cattle. This farm was in a group, a Delta G group, that were performance recording 80,000 female cattle annually. They would only select their bulls out of the top 10% of the performers, and they replaced them every year because they knew the next generation was going to be better. I found that the progressive beef producers in the USA and Brazil are using selection indexes for selecting their cattle. And this allows them to look at multi-traits and find an animal that suits their environment and their production goals. I was also interested in looking into grazing management systems because it's important to have good nutrition to allow the expression of the genetics. And in this area, I was particularly looking for ideas on maximum sustainable production per hectare, with the idea of being able to decrease our overheads per animal. And the key message that I got from this was the importance of managing ground cover. Degradation occurs when we end up reducing ground cover, but improving ground cover has the opposite effect in that it increases biodiversity of plants and increases the vigour of those plants. I looked into cell grazing, Serengeti grazing, ultra-high density grazing, and I thought all of these offered positive attributes. But again, the key thing that came out for me was grazing the pasture down and then giving it sufficient rest before regrazing. So those first two topics were strategies around two known key profit drivers in our industry. And the next 2 points that I'm going to look at are two things that I think are trends that will be important to our industry in the future. And I think polled cattle, that is, cattle that are born naturally without horns, are going to be the way of the future for us. Due to the better animal welfare, through not needing to dehorn, and through prevention of losses from dehorning, and thus trying to increase our gross margins. Now, I determined that there are two key ways to improving or increasing polledness within our herds. One is to select from within the breed and keep breeding from those. And the other is to bring in a crossbreed from a breed that has a high proportion of poles. In terms of crossbreeding, I was particularly interested in adapted Bos Taurus cattle, such as the Mashona cattle from Africa or the Senna poles from the Caribbean. I guess bringing in an adapted animal like that, you get a couple of benefits. You get the polledness, adaptation, as well as the hybrid vigour from crossbreeding. But I was also keen on the Brahmans because that's what we run in our environment and they're very well suited for our country. And the other thing with that is it keeps our system very simple, which frees up paddocks to allow us to to maintain our rotational grazing system. The Hornpole Test in Australia is great for determining which animals are homozygous polled, that is, carry 2 copies of the polled gene, or heterozygous polled and only have the 1 copy. If you have a homozygous bull, for example, you can cross him over horned cows and all of the progeny will be polled. And so it's significant to know that. And I think kudos to MLA, who were responsible or instrumental in providing funding to groups to study this and come up with this Hornpole test, where we can now simply pull a hair sample from an animal, send it to a lab, and for $25 can find out the polled status of that animal. And the final area that I was interested in looking at were complementary enterprises. And so my question was, what other enterprises can we run while we're running the cattle to create another good gross margin and to spread our overheads? And the diversified businesses that I visited tended to diversify in two ways. One was people would take on a completely different enterprise. For example, we visited a cattle operation that added a crayfish production area into a small area of the farm. And the other way was to intensify their production. So, for example, a cattle station that might add a feedlot or start direct marketing their beef. But across all of them, they all seem to be looking for leakage from their business, or were there resources within their business that weren't being utilised, and they would tap into those. And the master of this was Joel Salatin from Virginia in the United States. Time magazine refers to Joel as the world's most innovative farmer, and he was running an enterprise with pastured beef, pork, chickens, turkeys, rabbits, vegetables, and these were all integrated. He also processed all the animals on farm, or he owned his own abattoir, and then he sold all the product either off the farm or through buying clubs. He just didn't waste a thing. And so overall for me, my travels confirm that there really are no silver bullets, but that working with nature as much as possible has the potential to get good production by lowering costs, being good for the environment and good for business. And now each of those study areas that I looked at in their own right have got potential for us in the north. But I think the real power comes from when we look to integrate those. And what we can find is that 1 + 1 + 1 can equal 5 or 10 or 15. Excuse me. So I'd just like to give you an example of that from within our business. Recently we purchased cows like this cow here from CSIRO when they closed one of their research stations in Queensland. Now this cow has had 10 calves in 10 years in our northern environment, which is an amazing feat. These are the sort of genetics that we need for Northern Australia. Now we spoke earlier about using selection indexes. The JAP-OX index is an index that takes into account growth, fertility and carcass characteristics. And you can see for the Brahman breed, the average is +22, and this cow at +52 is in the top 5% of the breed. But she's 13 years old and is unlikely to have many more natural calves. And so we decided to do an in vitro fertilisation or IVF program to try and multiply those genetics before we lost the cow. So we tracked down some semen from bulls in central Queensland as well as from Louisiana. And this is one of the bulls that we used in the program. You can see his JAP-OX index is +50, which also places him in the top 5% of the breed. But here comes with an added bonus. He's been Hornpole tested, and we know before we even start the process that he's homozygous and all of the progeny will be polled. Plus, his dam has had 12 calves in 12 years, which is great fertility. So we worked with a group of Brazilian vets based in Brisbane because Brazil is leading the world in IVF technology for cattle. They flew up to our property, they collected follicles off the ovaries of these cows, then they flew them to a lab at the Royal Women's Hospital in Brisbane, where they were fertilised. Then 8 days later, flew back up to the property and transferred those embryos into cows of ours that weren't non-pregnant. And those cows then gave birth to these embryo calves. So in the end, out of our first program, we produced 51 IVF calves, 100% of them are polled, but they carry for us a unique combination of genetics that should be great in our environment. And they've been raised by cows in our environment. And so I think this comes back to managing the whole. Well, Yeah. So what we did is we worked with nature. We used cows that nature had selected as being the most adapted to our environment. We augmented that with technology, so using selection indexes, the Hornpole Test, and IVF to multiply the superior genetics. We've developed 2 complementary enterprises out of that. We were able to convert our cull cows that weren't pregnant into recipients that were able to carry valuable embryos. And then we've been getting interest from other people wanting to purchase the bull calves out of this program to use as bulls. And then we're experiencing a particularly dry year at the moment, so we've actually been able to reduce numbers because we know that this smaller number of cattle will be much more high performing for us. And so I guess it ties together a lot of the ideas that we've been talking about today. And I think this is only one example where this holistic, integrated thinking can come together and be a benefit to us in the north. So, how can the industry use this information? I think a lot of the technical aspects I spoke about earlier could all be used individually for benefit within grazing businesses straight away. And some people are. But I also think it would be great to have some more training in business models, in things like systems thinking, where we try and foresee what the unintended consequences might be of our actions. Circular economies, where we decouple growth from the scarce resources that we manage. And reduce, reuse, recycle, it's an old-fashioned concept, but can we add technology to give it a twist? And finally, we often talk about how research isn't taken up very well by farmers and grazers. But I think part of the reason for this is it's often done in a reductionist way. And in the RD&E model, sometimes the D bit gets forgotten, where we develop the idea into a whole farm context. And I think if we could do more of that, we may see more adoption. So I realise we've covered a lot of country over the last 15 minutes, but I just wanted to take you through the full journey that I've been through. And my contact details are there. I'm very happy to talk to anybody about any of those ideas. The proviso that I'm not an authority on any of them, but I'm having a red hot go at all of them. Thank you.